So I think we're live now. Hi everyone.
We're live.
Welcome
Hi,
to
everyone.
this
Hey
episode
guys.
of Beyond Payments 2022. We've got Rish and we've got Vinay in the call, and we're very excited to get started and just have a discussion about how I guess Vinay makes fintech work for him, and how that can maybe help the rest of us make fintech work for us too.
Yeah, just to give everyone a bit of context on this is a continuation of the Beyond Payment sessions that we've been doing over the last couple of months, building up to our big event in Q1 that Tide is hosting. We're really glad to have Vinay. I think Vinay is going to have some really good views on fintech. Obviously, being in Singapore, he can give us that perspective as well. And for those of you who've got questions, please reach out to us on live chat, and we'll try to get them to Vinay at some stage during the session. So, Vinay, I guess maybe just introduce yourself. Tell us a bit about yourself, how you got into fintech in the first place, and a bit about kind of a couple of things that you've been working on recently.
Sounds good. First of all, thank you so much for having me on board and wanting to hear my views. So first of all, just wanted to give that. My background, I can start from my current role and then go back. So my current role is I'm regional head at Wise Platform, which is the infrastructure division of Wise, formerly known as TransferWise. So Wise, if you're not aware, is a leader in cross-border money movement. So we process nearly $100 billion every year, employ about 2,500 people across 14 global offices. Wise Platform is the third and newest pillar of Wise's products. So basically allowing platforms like Google Pay and banks like Monzo to integrate and then basically benefit from Wise's pretty powerful global payments infrastructure. My background before this is that I used to live in the United States. I used to live in New York, and I was working for a kind of more early stage fintech, maybe more similar in vein to what you guys are building with Tide, right? So I was in a Series B fintech called Arcus, which is a YC-backed Andreessen Horowitz, not Anderson Cooper, but Andreessen Horowitz-backed fintech based in New York, focused on both LATAM and the US. So I used to head up the US payments, grew out the business. What I'm most proud of is that when I joined, annual processing volume, which I think for us is really like the truth center, right? Like you can't beat TPV as a metric. TPV was initially 1 billion. Forgive me, TPV was initially 1 million annually. When I left, it was 1 billion. So that was a pretty big jump up. And the fun ride was basically, how do you accommodate for that scale? How do you get to that scale, first of all? How do you accommodate for that scale? There'll be rejections, edge cases, refunds, compliance issues, and so on. So basically, that's something that I really learned quite a bit about doing in the US. And now what's really exciting for me is how do we work in Southeast Asia where things are maybe not even as clear, very fragmented, and how do we make sense of it? So I've basically been on a journey to do that. My start of the year, I moved back to Singapore from New York. I'm originally Singaporean, moved back to Singapore to kind of get back into Southeast Asia fintech with Wise. I realized like there's a lot that I don't know and there's a lot that I need to be aware of. So I started writing a newsletter called Island Fintech Weekly to basically keep me up to date and informed. Initially, found that other people also wanted to know about it, so decided to put it in a newsletter format. So basically geek out on a weekly basis, sometimes bi-weekly when work gets busy, but about fintech in Southeast Asia. And personally, I think that there's a lot of writing about fintech globally. There's people that really are interested about fintech. I think Southeast Asia is a key region for financial access that's not maybe given the appropriate amount of attention that it deserves. So I'm trying to fill that gap. Another thing that I work on right now is I work on angel investing. So I help run a angel investing collective called Fintech Angel Operators. So we basically create a space for operators and angels to co-align and basically try to grow out the fintech landscape here in Southeast Asia by connecting operators, that have awareness of regulatory nuances, the technological challenges, and compliance challenges, so on, that may not be open book access to every fintech founder. And providing, experienced operators in the region can, really help to bridge a gap from a knowledge perspective, but also from a Rolodex perspective, right? So that's the kind of thing that I do also outside of work. So I spend a lot of time, in my week in the pursuit of fintech, whether it's from my day-to-day work, but also outside my work. So really excited to see, like, I guess, what you guys are doing as well in the space. And yeah, that's a quick intro on myself.
Thanks for that. No, I think one of the things you said, sorry, Rich, one of the things that you said, Vinay, was very interesting to me. So Island Fintech, I'm a big fan. I've read every issue since I subscribed. I love it. And I think you're absolutely right. I think that, I mean, yes, okay. So specifically, fintech itself doesn't really get a lot of coverage here in Southeast Asia, especially when you're talking about anything that's not payments, right? The payments guys are always sort of hogging the limelight, so to speak. Um, but it's also startups, right? Just any startups alone. We hear a lot of people talking about Southeast Asia. They say, hey, Southeast Asia is a great place for, startups, for early stage startups. We see a lot of amazing startups in Southeast Asia, but there's no, um, there's no support for it, and no one's actually writing about the actual startups that are doing, amazing work here. And I think that's a little sad. Uh,
Mm.
and I really like that Island Fintech is trying to uh, change that, in a small way.
Yeah, you have these platforms, right? Like E27, Tech in Asia. And then there's a bunch of others like Business Times as Garage and things like that. And they really focused on like on ventures and the venture landscape. But those are still fairly niche. You have really amazing platforms like the Ken, for example, that are quite
Yeah.
focused actually on fintech, right? And I really love reading the Ken, and it really inspires me to actually like think about fintech a bit more. But I would love to see like a little bit more mainstream thought around it. Then again, right, like Joel, I think like we're still quite like in terms of the awareness as well as maturity, still a little bit behind in Southeast Asia. So I think it's just a matter of time. Right now we have the funding, the mega rounds that have come up, right? So I think it's just a matter of time that people actually use that firepower to put in, to various PR outlets, to various marketing channels. And I think we'll actually see that awareness. Like, for example, Grab and C, drove one of those 6 mega rounds that really like drove total funding in payments, right, in Q2 2021. And they've really like used the idea that they're a payments company to do that. So I think that coming to the next few months, quarters, years, we're actually going to see a little bit more awareness and like more mainstream understanding. So the fact that we have this, like sort of forum just to talk about fintech, I think is amazing, and I think it contributes to that. We'll be a little bit ahead of the curve once we're there.
That's really interesting, Vinay. I mean, one of the things you mentioned, obviously, you spent a bit of time in Europe, and obviously the mentality there is very different, right, to what we're seeing on the ground in Southeast Asia. And what are some of the lessons that you learned from being there that you brought back home?
I think one of them is that it's really important to know people. You can't really get done. Sorry, I was going to say you can't really get things done, but you also can't get done without having the right people that you're connected with, that you have as trust partners, that can also lead you to further things along the space. For example, like in the US, right, like you have a federal system, right? So each state maybe has their own sort of regulatory nuances, challenges for maybe setting up a sponsor bank. If I had to work with a bank in Kansas versus a bank in, say, California, it really helps to know someone that's maybe conversant in the local regulation there. So things like that really helps. So like contextualizing that to Southeast Asia, say that I want to scale up a business. Maybe I've invested into a fintech in Indonesia that's kind of in the lending vertical, maybe in buy now pay later. It really helps if in Southeast Asia we have in Singapore the connections with maybe someone that's conversant in lending and in the kind of nuances around building a sustainable lending business. And then two, how do you work with the Indonesian regulators? Like how do you work with OJK? How do you work with BI? By the way, those are the Indonesian pronunciations of OJK and BI. I speak to the Indonesian like kind of counterparts at those organizations quite often, so I use those terms, as I'm sure you guys do as well. But it's really like that's one thing, right? Just being able to know the right people. And so in New York, one of the cool things was that there were very frequent mixes or events or like community-driven things that would really like kind of ground up initiatives that allowed people to come together and figure out how do we do this thing called fintech, which is really like how do you challenge mainstream financial services to adopt basically modern practices of tech, right? Like it's a very like you're really like challenging the norm and the status quo, so it has to be done well. You can't do that with just the head on your shoulders alone. You need to look at other heads and how they've done things as well. So I think Singapore at least has a lot to go and move there. I think Southeast Asia even like in Singapore, I think there's a couple of cool initiatives like the Singapore Fintech Association. They're putting together like kind of Slack groups, industry mixers and things like that to kind of bring people together, to bring different heads on different shoulders together to kind of work together, exchange ideas, share notes, share contacts, and be able to make sense of Southeast Asia together. So that's one thing that I also am trying to do as well. One of the goals for Island Fintech is one, to create obviously readership and awareness around fintech. And I actually am always on the lookout for guest writers. I don't want it to be just my perspective. I want other heads on other shoulders to like kind of share their views. So I'm really excited this weekend to actually share someone who's actually from the buy now pay later space to write about their time at buy now pay later, and stay tuned for that. But basically what I'd like to do with Island Fintech is I'd also like it to evolve into a community as well. People that are interested in payments, whether they are early on or late, whether they're founders or they're operators, to basically come together and have conversations such as this, where we can really just chat about the things that we're doing in our organizations, what makes it challenging, what makes it good, what makes it unique, what do customers want, right? Like what, like say you want to launch a product in a particular space, you've already tried to do that, you can tell me that doesn't work or these approaches don't work. So it's tremendously useful to have these conversations, these connections, and that's to wrap up to the question, key learning for me from New York.
Oh, well, one of the things I think Joel and I found very early in our journey was that the fintech environment is naturally hostile, and there is a bit of a dog eat dog type personality towards people that come into the space, and we found that really that wasn't sustainable. And if we adopted that same mentality and I guess just went up against everyone, we weren't going to get really far. So one of the things we're doing with Beyond Payments is collaboration and partnership is at the heart of pretty much everything we do. Do you see that as something that is getting traction in Singapore, or do you still think there's an element of, oh, I need to beat these guys, I need to get first mover advantage and stuff like that?
I love the fact that you're approaching it from that perspective, because I do think that that's one of the challenges really. Like it is a competitive landscape for funding, it's a competitive landscape for user acquisition. It's a competitive landscape for hiring, right? Like, so it is a dog eat dog world out there. But you know what? If we're able to make sense of the fact that we are still the underdogs in the space, right? Like, honestly, the amount of the market that we've acquired together as fintechs is still extremely minimal. I can speak, for the cross-border space or in payments in general, but really like the amount of volume that's being processed by the large incumbents is still like this big, right? And we're really like this small. So the more of us that actually come up and have prominence and have user adoption, the better we do in terms of funding, in terms of, other users adopting, because someone says, just to use the example of, say, a wealth tech, right? Endowus or Stashaway. Endowus and Stashaway, I don't think it's a zero-sum game for them. It's like an infinite sum game for them. The TAM is basically like anyone that has any funds to invest, right? Okay, assuming they have $1,000 in their bank account, which is, I think, is their minimum required sum. But their competition is really like the large incumbent traditional wealth management type institutions, right? So the more people that, are able to say, hi, my name is Joel. Hi, my name is Rish. I use Endowus or I use Stashaway. That helps someone like Saif to come in and say, you know what, I'm also here in the space. I do something slightly different. There's something that we can do here as well. So I think that there's the idea that we should really like kind of put each other down in fintech is kind of like going backwards in terms of what we're doing. We should really like look at each other as partners, as collaborators, as basically deviants in the financial services space, and work together to kind of grow for the collective good of society, really.
Absolutely, and that's exactly what we set out to do when we started building. Well, before this was Mercury Pay, and now we've just rebranded to Tide, and that's exactly what we set out to do from the beginning, right? We realized that sort of support structure, that sort of framework for fintechs to plug into, and I'm talking about fintechs of all shapes and sizes, not just the big players or the payments guys, right? I'm talking about all kinds of fintechs, right? Whether they do deposits, whether they do buy now, pay later, insurance, investment, whatever it is, right? Um, there's nothing for them to plug into, and to sort of approach consumers sort of on an equal playing field, right? And
Right.
so that's exactly what we set out to do. That's what we've built with Tide, right? We've built sort of a flat framework where everyone can find everyone else.
Yeah.
And it's not just for consumers; it's also for businesses to find fintechs that they can work with. So it's quite exciting to hear you say that you think that partnerships and collaboration is really the future of fintech, because that's what we've been doing from day one.
That's really cool. Just to understand better, basically, is it like an orchestration layer for different pieces to kind of connect and talk to each other and work? So like you can plug into one service and then you can integrate the others like on the back end?
So that's kind of what our backend will eventually look like, right? And we want to sort of get to a point where we're sort of like the Zapier of
Mm,
fintechs,
nice. Yeah.
right? And that's kind of what we're heading towards. But for now, just sort of get that traction and also to sort of build that. I don't say dependency, but that sort of idea that fintech can actually help more than an incumbent, or traditional financial service.
Hmm.
We're trying to reach out to consumers and businesses first, right, and
Hmm.
get them to participate on a purely retail or commercial layer first
Hmm.
before we start doing the sort of the back end of the Zapier stuff that we want to do.
Right. Makes sense. I actually wrote about a quote from Tessa from Zendit that she kind of mentioned with the fundraise with Tiger that made them a unicorn. Um, she mentioned that like basically it's really important to be a full stack player for them, for their merchant partners, because this is basically the way that merchants come online. Like you don't just give them the hook for payments. You need to give them things like you can subscribe to Shopify or you can subscribe to Google Suite. And all of these things packaged together is what gets a merchant to say that, all right, the combined package, the total revenue opportunity here makes a lot of sense for me to become digital first. Otherwise, maybe not. So it makes sense that you're trying to put everything together, because that's what, at least at this point of maturity, it takes to get people to kind of understand digital first.
So, tell us what kind of fintech products do you use? I mean, on a daily basis, like weekly, monthly, whatever. What is it that you use? Why you use it? And just how do you think they help you over what's available from traditional services?
So that's a good question. My phone is, I think, in another room, but I could open it, and I think the first things you would see are like my fintech products, because when I was in the US, big user of Venmo. Now I use Pay Now. So for any times that I go out, I try to not get people to pay, but sometimes people want to pay. So peer-to-peer payments for a dinner or a meal goes through that. DBS, the app is actually called DigiBank. DBS really prides itself as a digibank. There is the DBS app that I use as well. It's actually quite nice. It's pretty easy to use. Pulls the information that I need real time. So it's pretty good to use. I obviously use Wise. Actually use Wise to send money to the US because I trade on a brokerage account in the US. I still have my Robinhood account, which I still feel like is the best UI for at least a casual trader like myself. So I use Robinhood for trading. What else do I use? I also use Endowus and Stashaway for the more ETF type kind of set it and forget it type investments. What else do I use, man? There's definitely a bunch of other things that I use as well, but I think the feeling for me right now is that things are actually getting more and more consolidated. You're seeing, like, for example, like DBS trying to build its own Endowus / Stashaway stuff and putting it in there. You might also see DBS building out something for remittances in there. So that might so I see that like everything's actually like pooling together. We're reaching this thing where I think it's like modularity in fintech. Like fintech products and platforms are turning into modules that you can sort of like plug together and then have a consolidated product, so that you basically have, like I mentioned earlier, like the customer just having to go to one platform, the total kind of financial life of the customer is actually there. They can understand and make sense of all the user data as well. So for example, right, say I don't have maybe a bank account, or maybe I don't have a credit card. If for example, like in Indonesia or in Vietnam or maybe one of the developing countries, there's not so much of a profile that's created on me. A wallet could then have this much peer-to-peer payments, this much merchant payments, this much something else, and then say, hey, you know what, we just launched a credit product. Do you want to have a credit card? Do you want to have a personal loan? Do you want to refi your mortgage, and so on? So long-winded answer to this, but I see that I have a lot of apps, but I think long-term, I see them kind of shrinking into smaller pieces.
Nice. I mean, what's your? I mean, one of the things, I came to Southeast Asia from Abu Dhabi, and when I left, I could see that the fintech trends there were escalating at a pretty rapid pace. Everything was becoming AI, ML. Everything on the biometric side was pushing forward. Obviously, we've talked about open banking and things like that. What do you think the next 6 months to 1 year is going to bring to the market? I mean, where do you think the focus is going to be? Is it going to be purely payment solutions and open banking, or do you think there's going to be a big rise in RPA and things like that?
Yeah, I think right now there are a few clear trends. So first, I think would be open finance. There's an incredible demand for credit. I think it's being bolstered by this rising middle class, right? So there's need for basically people to grow, with their lifestyles, and so with that comes the need for credit. So integrating that is basically now possible by the network nodes, basically of the fintech node, you have the consumer node, you have the financial institution node. So connecting that well is going to give people access. So I think that's one huge trend in Southeast Asia. Another one will be wealth technology. We're seeing consumer purchasing and savings power a lot of growth region wide. So I think, as people, get more money and also start becoming more comfortable investing that money and also using that money for different things, there's an acceleration for consumer facing financial services. So retail investing, savings, card products, etc. So that'll be best served basically by the next generation of consumer facing products, which I think are coming up. Thirdly, I think B2B processes are also improving. So after the first wave of digitization that was really initially focused on e-commerce and digital consumer behavior, those merchants themselves have also become more digitized. So they're also seeking digital solutions. So we're seeing that across, say B2B payments, cross-border transactions, even in merchant financing, so a lot of other financial services as well. So I think those are kind of the three clear trends: open finance, wealth tech, and then also in the B2B space, particularly in merchants.
How do you see blockchain factoring into that equation? Like, obviously decentralized networks and the lack of third-party execution necessary there. Everyone's talking about it, and there's a big kind of hoo-ha going on in the States now about how do you actually regulate it. How do you see that kind of impacting that picture as well?
I think what might happen is something similar to buy now, pay later, where like there's actually a practicable use case for it, in the sense that we can sort of pull away from, the regulatory or even the counterparty needs, right? Like you have a bank that maybe isn't so comfortable with it, so why not just pull away and do something of your own, right? So I think what might happen is that we see that DeFi maybe gets some sort of practical adoption and is maybe slightly ahead of the curve before it gets regulated. And so it gets wheels in motion, but I don't think that's going to happen over the next 6 months. I think right now there's a lot of activity going on in the space. There's a lot of speculation as well. But I don't really see the usage just yet, at least like for mainstream applications. I see that you have platforms, you have card acquirers, you have, trade financing, you have Temasek, and you actually have pretty big platforms that are like investing into it. But the actual rubber hits the road, I don't think is going to kind of take off until a while, from now. But I think what might happen is that we're actually getting, the right connections to start enabling that, because I think that that's something that's really important for anything to really take off, right? The enablement landscape. So I feel like the soil is getting watered, but the plants will take a little bit more time to even not even like flourish or bloom, but even to kind of seed and sprout at this point.
Nice.
What do you think, Rish and Joel?
So I think that with blockchain, and with finding applicable use cases of blockchain, like actual real world use cases of blockchain, because right now it's all very theoretical. You can see that there may be a use case for this, but it's difficult to actually put that into practice, into actual real life situations.
Yep.
But I think that with the rise of, like you said, open finance, right, we're going to see that as one of the largest enablers of blockchain-based technology, right? Especially in fintech, because I think it's a question of trust, right? Because yes, it's decentralized, but who owns it? Who's got that data? Who's holding that data, right? And yes, you can say that everyone holds the data, but that only works for cryptocurrency, right? It doesn't really work for anything else. Like if I say, look, I'm going to put all the tied data on a blockchain, it sounds good, but why would I do that? Why would
Yeah.
I do that? And how would I share that with anyone? Because essentially that's still tied data, right?
Yeah.
So unless there's some way, some sort of open framework that will allow everyone to own a piece of tied data, right?
Mhm.
That really doesn't make sense just yet. So yeah, I think you're right. I think we are going to see it happen, but I think that we're going to see it happen faster in places where there is more of a push towards open finance than in places where it's sort of still just hold on to
I think it
everything.
might happen in places like Guatemala, for example, where you actually have like Bitcoin is legal tender and so on. So like maybe from a reg perspective, there's already like that sort of maybe a soft spot for the not even like it's not even crypto, right? Like I think crypto sometimes has a bad rep because crypto is like kind of associated with the speculation with the coins and so on. But blockchain is really like the actual application around it, right? Which is like why was it designed? Why do we have like you know cryptography basically being used to make sense of these sorts of things. So um maybe it also has to do with the adoption of people having these coins and having the nodes to basically start validating each other. Like you said, tied data. Unless we have the different nodes in place that's able to like process that and have like that information being sent across, it's not going to work, right? So um it's a fun one, but I'm actually kind of it's a real wild card, right? Like I like don't really know where it's going at the same time as like I think it could be something really big.
Yeah, yeah. I suppose you could say that. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's certainly something that I'm not so conversant on. I have someone called Joyce. You might have read Joyce's column started this month, but Joyce is going to be writing every month on Island Fintech Weekly and kind of edition called Island Crypto Weekly. She works at crypto.com and is a real crypto insider. So she's been teaching me a lot. And I think if Joyce is listening, hey, Joyce.
Hi, Joyce.
Brilliant.
Cool.
I just checking to see whether we've got any questions from the audience on anything. One of the questions I actually had, which I think someone else is going to ask something very similar about, is so how are you guys using kind of customer intelligence and data analytics in what you're doing both at Wise and what you've done elsewhere? Is that a lot of your principal? Is a lot of investment going into that space, or how are you analyzing those consumer trends that we're seeing?
So I can speak for FAO, right? Like, which is Fintech Angel Operators.
Yeah.
We're the first fintech focused angel investing group in Southeast Asia. So we're really looking at trends to kind of inform us in terms of what should we look out for, what should we invest in. So we don't really use user specific data to kind of understand that or make sense of that. But rather we're looking more at industry wide trends. So where is the total processing volume coming from? So I think one example of that has been the Bain Google Temasek report, right? So you can actually look at some of the volumes that have been coming up and where are the expected volumes coming from. So lending loan book, for example, 2019 to 2020 didn't really grow. It was 23 billion in 2019, 23 billion in 2020. But then you have something like investment AUM that's being held. 2019 was 10 billion. 2020 was 21 billion. By the way, I have it open in front of me, so it's not something that I've cleared in my memory. In case that you think I'm a freak like that, but and then like so you do see certain trends come up, and then you sort of think, all right, I think this is maybe has more room to grow, or maybe is saturated as well, right? So I think that that data and that decisioning really does inform the way we think about certain verticals. Um, and maybe it's the case that we've seen too much growth in one area. Like maybe we've seen too much growth into investments. Maybe it's a little bit of a bubble. Like how much is this going to sustain into the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years? Because really what we're looking at is not like a 1 year exit pop kind of thing, right? Like at least for me, my thesis is that I'm looking for very long-term sort of investments that will really try to contribute to solving a larger problem in Southeast Asia or in finance. So I'm not looking for that hot growth, but so sometimes if lending loan book is 0%, that is a good number for me, because that means that there's still, if you look at say the other numbers, right? Like there's one like really beautiful like graph that I've seen, which just shows you what is the informal borrowers as a total percentage of borrowers in Southeast Asia. I actually have this from a presentation I did recently. I can share my screen if you like, but I can just kind of call it out as well. In Philippines, informal borrowers as a percentage of total borrowers in Southeast Asia is 82%. So that means 82% of the borrowers actually go to, like a gray payday lender style, loan shark style person. They don't go to a regulated financial entity. So can you imagine like the risk that they're putting themselves through to basically have access to credit? Similar numbers for Indonesia, Thailand, 66% in Indonesia, 57% for Thailand. So the fact that the lending loan book actually hasn't increased, and the fact that these numbers are still so high, just shows me that open finance is a really big opportunity. So yeah, Rich, to your question, like numbers really do matter, and they sort of inform a lot of, at least in my work as an angel, informs a lot of my thinking and decisioning as to where I invest.
Cool. Thanks so much for agreeing to be on this call, Vinay. I think we covered a lot of stuff, really interesting stuff. There was a lot of really nice nerdy tidbits in there for the nerds like me, I guess.
Yes.
I I was wondering if you had anything that you wanted to tell people about fintech, or where it's going, or what they should really be looking into before we wrap this up.
For sure. I think that I just want to just encourage people to read more about fintech and to, just be aware of the changes and happenings, because I think that's the most important piece to, just allow us collectively to build our knowledge and understanding and, awareness of the space. So that would be my first like sort of recommendation, just so that we can keep this going. And if you're listening right now, maybe you are interested in fintech, or you might be a practitioner of fintech. So if you want to kind of use my weekly newsletter as something that you can rely on as one extra way of doing that, feel free to subscribe. You can just go to islandfintech.substack.com. I also bought the domain recently, so maybe I'll kind of have it just as islandfintech.com. And another thing that I would love to kind of call out is, if you have a startup that is in fintech, and you are interested in kind of raising money and growing your business, you can also reach out to us. We do pre-seed, seed rounds with Fintech Angel Operators. So you can reach out to me directly on LinkedIn, or you can go to fintechangeloperators.com. Same applies if you're an angel and you're looking to kind of get involved in the angel space, where a growing number of angels in the space. We've only been around for about 3 to 4 months, but we've seen so much activity, so much kind of investments actually going on already. So would love to have more folks kind of joining us. So getting involved is super easy. So you can just go on fintechangeloperators.com, or you could just reach out to me on LinkedIn as well, and join us or learn more about us before joining us. I think that's all I kind of wanted to add. Thank you so much, Joel and Rish, for inviting me to be here. I also really enjoyed the nerdiness of this conversation.
Yeah.
It really got me going this sleepy Friday afternoon. So thanks for having me.
I think the fact that you had some stats open on your computer in front of you was the high point of the conversation. But no, seriously, Vinay, it's always great to see collaborative perspectives as well on fintech, right? It's not always headbutting and clashing, and I think today's conversation showed that. So I'd recommend anyone who's listening to go check Vinay out, check the work he's doing. I think it's super important, and these conversations are super important. It's all exactly what we're trying to aiming to do with Beyond Payments. Bring like-minded and non-like-minded individuals together in a pursuit for more kind of fintech haven that we're trying to develop here. So, we're going to have another session, what, Joel, 2 weeks? Yeah.
2 weeks, yeah.
In 2 weeks, so join us for that. And yeah, look, Vinay, we'll definitely be inviting you back. I think we only kind of scratched the surface on some of the topics. So yeah, wait for the next invite.
Looking forward to it. Thanks, guys.
All right. Thanks everyone for watching. Please, I say this every week. It's kind of weird for me to say this because I'm not really a YouTuber, but like and subscribe to this channel, please. We really need your support. Thank you so much for watching again, and have a great weekend, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, bro.